Good morning. It's still pretty early here for a morning lecture, 10:40. We will today begin a new article of apocalyptic tone recently adopted in philosophy. Authors Jacques Derrida and John P. Leavey, Jr.
Leavey is the translator.
Leavey is the translator, thank you, Cal. It was published in 1984, so it's not that recent, the apocalyptic tone. Page 3. Of an apocalyptic tone recently adapted in philosophy. Jacques Derrida. I shall then off in an apocalyptic tone in philosophy. The 70 have bequeathed us a translation of Gala. It is called the Apocalypse. In Greek, apocalypsis would translate words derived from the Hebrew verb gala. I'm referring here, without drawing any authority from them, to some indications of André Chouraqui, to which I shall return. But I must forewarn you even now, the histories or enigmas of translation I hear spoken of, that I intend to speak about, and which I shall get myself entangled for reasons more serious than my incompetence. they are, I believe, without solution or exit. That will be my theme. More than a theme, a task. I shall not discharge. The other day, Jean Ricardou asked me, we were talking then about translation, to say a little more about what I had sketched out on a grace given beyond work. Sorry. Thanks to work, but without it. I was talking then of a gift given there, but above all, given there without having, in the final account, to merit it, responsibility. We must translate, and we must not translate. I am talking about the double bind of Yahweh, when with the name of his choice, with his name, one could say Babel. He gives to translate and not to translate. And no one forever since then eludes the double postulation. Well, to Jean Ricardou, I shall reply as follows, and do so in the form of an elliptical thanks. For what I'm given here. Given to think, or simply given, beyond the thinkable. That is to say, that would be to say in German, beyond all memory, and some thanks given by our hosts at Cerisy. By Philippe Lacoue-Labarthe and by Jean-Luc Nancy. By all you with so much work and grace, so much grace in your work. Proof against translation. Grace would perhaps come when the writing of the other absolves you. From time to time, from the infinite double bind. And first of all, such is a gift's condition, absolves itself, unbinds itself from this double bind, unburdens or clears itself. Unbinds itself from this double bind. Very important. It, the language of writing, this giving trace that always comes from the other, even if it is no one. to clear oneself of the gift, of the given gift, of giving itself, is the grace I now know you have, and in any case that I wish for you. This grace is always improbable. It can never be proved. But must we not believe it happens? That was perhaps yesterday belief itself. Belief we mentioned many times before, and it plays an important role here. Do remember the distinction between ratio and affection, pathos. Another way of saying, for what you have given me during these 10 days, I not only thank you, I pardon you. Ti absolvo. But who can authorize himself to pardon? who can authorize himself to pardon? Very important. Under whose jurisdiction, I would say. Let's say that I ask pardon for you and of you yourselves for you yourselves. Apocalypto. No doubt was a good word for gala. Apocalypto, I disclose, I uncover, I unveil. I reveal the thing that can be a part of the body. The head or the eyes, a secret part, the sex or whatever might be hidden, a secret thing, the thing to be dissembled. A thing that is neither shown nor said. Signified perhaps, but that cannot or must not first be delivered up to self-evidence. Apokalumeno logi are incident remarks. So it is a matter of the secret and the pudenda. And remember here Heidegger, veiling, unveiling. The covering that makes truth possible, or the process of unveiling and veiling that makes the world come. The Greek language shows itself hospitable here to the Hebrew Gala. As André Chouraqui recalled in his short Liminaire pour l'Apocalypse of John. The word gala recurs more than 100 times in the Hebrew Bible. And it seems in effect to say apocalypsis, disclosure, discovery, uncovering, unveiling. The veil lifted from about the thing. First of all, if we can say this, man's or woman's sex, but also their eyes or ears. Chouraqui specified that someone's ear is discovered in lifting up the hair or the veil that covers it in order to whisper a secret into it. A word as hidden as a person's genitals. Yahweh can be the agent of this disclosure, this uncovering. In parenthesis I comment it's similar to removing the foreskin. The arm or glory of Yahweh can also be uncovered to a man's gaze or ear. as you speak it or show it. So nowhere does the word apocalypse have the sense it finally takes on in French and other languages of fearsome catastrophe. Thus, the apocalypse is essentially a contemplation or an inspiration at the sight, the uncovering or disclosure of Yahweh, and here of Yeshua, the Messiah. Yesterday in the lecture 114, I mentioned prophecies and divinations. Apocalypse can be one of those perceived small things that has the immense power to make a turbulent change. To invigorate the world with life, which is difference. Perhaps it would be necessary, and I thought for a moment of doing this, to collect, lever, or bring out, relever or relever, all the senses pressing around this Hebrew gala or gala. Faced with the columns and colossi of Greece, faced with the galactic under the Milky Ways, whose constellation had recently fascinated me. My comment here might be unnecessary, but is indirectly referring to the Greek word "ala," meaning milk. Curiously, there again, we would have found significations like those of stone rolls, of cylinder, of parchment rolls and books, of rolls that envelope or furnish, but above all, the idea of laying bare, of specifically apocalyptic unveiling. Of the disclosure that lets be seen what to then remain enveloped. Secluded, held back, for example, the body when the clothes are removed, or the glands when the foreskin is removed in circumcision. It's a great leap done here from the galactic under the Milky Ways. Oddly enough, we were speaking about galaxies, and there is a connection here. The vortex shows you that the apocalyptic has several turns. It's not one turn, it is several. Like the glands coming uncovered in the circumcision. And what seems the most remarkable in all the biblical examples I was able to find and must forego exposing here is that the gesture of denuding or of affording sight, the apocalyptic movement. See here, movement come into the play, is more serious here. Sometimes more guilty and more dangerous than what follows. And what it can give rise to, for example, copulation. Thus, when in Genesis 9:21, Noah gets drunk and uncovers himself in his tent,
Spelar in. Du är välkommen.
Ham sees his father's genitals, the glans, and his two brothers, to whom he reports this to come to cover Noah again. But turn away from him in order not to see his genitals, covering, veiling, thea, the left turn in the vortex. Even there, the unveiling is not the most guilty moment of copulation. But when Yahweh, speaking to Moses, declares a certain number of sexual prohibitions, the fault does indeed seem to consist essentially in the unveiling that affords seeing. Thus in Leviticus 20:11-17, the man who lies with his father's wife has uncovered his father's sex. Both of them are put to death. The man who takes his sister, his father's daughter, or his mother's daughter, he sees her sex, she sees his sex. It is incest. but the terrifying and sacred gravity of this apocalyptic uncovering is not any the less, of course, in the case of the arm of Yahweh, of his glory, or of ears open to his revelation, uncovered ears, I had to say, or where the hair, as previously mentioned, has been taken away as to expose the ear to what is said. And the disclosure not only opens to vision or contemplation, not only affords seeing, but also affords hearing, understanding. For the moment, I forego interpreting all the accords between Gala and the Apocalyptic. The Hebrew and the Greek, here it came. These accords are numerous and powerful. They support a great concert of translations, even if they do not exclude dissonances, deviations, or inadequations. Do remember this is of utmost importance. They support a great concert of translations, even if they do not exclude dissonances, deviations, and inadequations. Those are an important part of what is written and said. They are part of the spiral of the movement. One could say participatory. These are like the turbulences, the molestations, the disturbances that are so important for the text, the said or the seen, to become true. Most often ignored or despised these days. So Derrida is, in the proper fashion, in an inadequate way, which it has to be, replace apocalypto with gala, to showing the movement. But also show it's a bon mot, a good word. It means I disclose, I uncover, I unveil. This double or triple sense is of utmost importance. Only by these can a disclosure effectively come true, come to the fore. He called it oddly Milky Ways, made it several ways, several turns. And several aspects, so very telling. And he also presses the seeing. How Noah drunk uncovers himself, and it is the seeing, not the copulation. Later, with Moses, the turn goes one leap further, while not going to the same position. It has turned in the vortex. Comment here from my colleague Kalle. The sun has moved a bit here. Let's put this on.
Thank you. Thank you, Hans and Derrida. Derrida does something that is normally forbidden in academic or scientific papers. That is, he compares, that is, a Hebrew verb, gala, that means uncover, and a Greek noun, gala. They look similar, but as we know, Hebrew is a Semitic language, and Greek is not a Semitic language, so they are not related. But despite this, Derrida makes a pun to uncover hidden meanings. So say, galax is, as we know, is related to milk, and galaxy, so it's a there is much to ponder on in this paper by Derrida. And I look forward to hear more from this paper, and I will be silent for the moment being and listen as we go forward in this very long paper.
Thank you very much, Kalle, for your comment. To understand the matter more, he can bring the course further, and I have an example from the Asiatic languages to show that maybe he can make a deconstruction of the word gala in Greek to show no relation between the Milky Ways and the milky your mother's breast. That is further deconstruction of this maybe obstructing tendency in language. Open up more. And this, of course, is the deconstructive process. Seeing more meanings, because they are new events whereas the connection between Gala and galactic are non-informative, all the thence. They don't no longer have the true language movement that can unveil and tell. Continue, Victor.
You can continue, please, if you want.
It's gonna move to the sun a bit.
Yes.
You can sit on the chair.
Let's see. It's
We're taking advantage of the nice weather here. For once, Gothenburg is blessed. No wind has been unveiled here. Preferring to let them resound alone, I have chosen to speak to you rather of, in, an apocalyptic tone recently adopted in philosophy. No doubt I wanted thus to mime in citation, but also to transform into a genre, and then parody, deport, deform the well-known title of perhaps less well-known pamphlet of Kant. Von einem neuerdings erhobenen vornehmen Ton in der Philosophie from 1796. The established French translation d'un ton grand seigneur adopté naguère en philosophie. What happens to a title when made to undergo this treatment? When it begins thus to resemble the category of a genre. Here, a genre that come down to mocking those who give themselves a genre. In making this choice, I also hope to go meet those who, in one of the seminars these 10 days, have precisely organized their work by privileging the reference to a certain Kantian caesura in the time of philosophy. but I also let myself be seduced by another thing. The attention to tone, which is not just style, seems rather rare to me. Tone has been little studied for itself, supposing that it is possible or has ever been done. A tone's distinctive signs are difficult to isolate, very important. A tone's distinctive signs are difficult to isolate. Its constituents, or its atoms, if you like. If they even exist in complete purity, which I doubt, above all in a written discourse, by what is a tone marked? A change or rupture of tone. And how do you recognize a tonal difference within the same corpus? What traits are to be trusted for analyzing this? What signposting, neither stylistic nor rhetorical, nor evidently thematic or semantic, the extreme difficulty of this question, indeed of this task, becomes more accentuated in the case of philosophy. is not the dream or the idea of philosophical discourse, of philosophical address, and of the writing supposed to represent that address. And of the writing to supposed to represent that address. Isn't it to make tonal differences inaudible? And with it, a whole desire, affect or scene that work over the concept in contraband. Through what is called neutrality of tone, philosophical discourse must also guarantee the neutrality of at least the imperturbable serenity that should accompany the relation to the true and to the universal. Consequently, will it be possible to listen to or detect the tone of a philosopher, or rather the soi-disant or bogus philosopher? And I need to add something here. And I looked at this earlier on. It is very similar to what my dear professor once taught me in phonology and phonetics. That words, tones if you like, that we take for granted to be meaning the same or of being of relation. He took the word, the Latin prefix con, meaning with, together, and showed phonetically, examined scientifically in the different words, it showed little or non-relation. This is the bogus philosopher who makes unlawful connections between the words, and the tone is, so to speak, unknown to us by the very act of atomizing it, or rather define it. Is sort of deconstructed semantics and etymology. Doing a major work in showing languages or language true body, and not with a bogus foreskin. And that is closer to the true and the universal. Soi-disant. And if someone promised us to do this, would not he be engaging to pick out all the traits that in a corpus, huge collection of words, are not yet, or no longer philosophical? All the regrettable deviations in relation to the, listen now, atonal norm of philosophical address. So for the bogus philosopher to make his philosophical address, he has to rid the very language or the tone, or why not Yahweh, of its breath, its signifying breath. In fact, if Kant did have the audacity, very singular in history, to concern himself systematically with a certain tone in philosophy, we must immediately nuance the praise we would like to give him for this. First, it is not certain that he is bent on or succeeds in analyzing the pure phenomenon of tonality, as we are going to verify. Next, less does he analyze a tone in philosophy than denounce a manner of giving oneself airs. Now it is a manner or a mannerism that precisely does not seem to him to be a very good tone. In philosophy, and so marks already a deviation to the norm of philosophical discourse. more seriously. He attacks a tone that announces something like the death of philosophy. The expression is Kant's and appears twice in his 20-page lampoon. Each time this death is associated with the idea of a supernatural revelation. Of a vision provoking a mystic exaltation, or at least a visionary pose. The first time, it is a question of a supernatural communication or a mystical illumination that promises a substitute or a supplement, a surrogate of a knowable object. Which is then the death of all philosophy. Der Tod aller Philosophie. And right near the end, Kant warns against the danger of an exalted vision, which is the death of all philosophy. It's almost like he warns against pathos, affection, affecting. Kant's comments are also marked with the tone he gives himself. With the effects he searches for, with his polemical or satiric verve. This is a social critique, and its premises have a properly political character. But if it derides a tone that announces the death of philosophy, the tone in itself is not what is being mocked. Besides the tone itself, what is it? Is it something other than a distinction? A tonal difference that no longer refers except by figure to a social code. To group or cast mores, to class behaviors by a great numbers of relays that no longer have anything to do with the pitch, the loftiness of the voice, or timbre. Although, as I suggested a moment ago, the tonal difference does not pass for the essentially philosophical. The fact that there is tone, tonal marking, is not itself alone. For Kant, what announces the death of all philosophy? It is a certain tone, a certain inflection, socially coded to say such and such a determinate thing. The tonal loftiness he overwhelms with his sarcasm remains a metaphoric loftiness. These people speak in a lofty pitch. These loudspeakers raise the voice, but this is only said by figure and by reference to social signs. Kant never disregards the content Nevertheless, this fact is far from insignificant. The first time a philosopher comes to speak of the tone of the other self-styled philosophers, when he comes to inaugurate this theme and names in his very title, I will put a note here and make a summary. I came up with an example, and in Chinese the tonal differences often are reduced to reduced to semantical differences. But there are so many examples in, for example, Chinese, where what would be in a Western take dissimilar words share meanings. The word for 4, 4, sounds oddly similar to death, and therefore avoided by chance. But in the Western take, they become dissimilar. Our tendency to make the language atonal can also affect pitch. This is a good example to understand what sort of tendency Derrida here is pointing towards. And as it says here, the audacity of Immanuel Kant to proclaim the death of philosophy by making his own words atonal. And it's also the close realization of signposting and address. Allocation, I think it's in French, can also feel location there. Another most important thing when we make things atonal. We localize them. I here remember the voice of the friend in autobiography, whereby discerning from what direction the voice is coming, we take away things from it. We make it atonal by localizing it. And of course, it becomes wholly another writing with a French translation coming into Seigneur giving it another tone altogether. It's the tone that bears and carries, not the clothing or the foreskin of the word. The superficial, non-meaningful connections that especially written text can give a whole science of constriction. Just as Kant got an immensity of air from this atonal swerve. Maybe a comment here from my colleague. Let's see, I'll put it on.
I can hold it. Thank you.
Here's a sec. Now.
I have to admit that I don't get his pun with the Milky Ways, Gala and the Greek milk. Did you get it? So I will ask a question to my colleague.
Why Milky Ways?
Well, he infers it very subtle. It doesn't mention directly galaxies, but it's obvious in the text. Gala is repeated. First, as in galactic, coming from the word Milky Way, milkiness of the galaxy. And then he calls it with plural, which is very important, Milky Ways. He's deconstructing the constricting, as my dear professor called it, the pseudoscience of semantics, giving it meaning, which is always new. I come to think about the invigorating tendencies. See it as turbulence. Only turbulence can bring to the fore the true meanings of words. And maybe, think of the voice of the friend. If you put name to it, if you define it, like similar here to saying that milk is related to gala. Gala in Greek. Then you constrict language. It becomes less telling. All that we sometimes do, define, show relation, putting together in causality, is now becoming softer, more open. Although it is a very difficult text, even I who read Derrida since 1997 feel that.
I still don't get it. So in what way is Derrida deconstructing it if he uses the plural for Milky Ways instead of the singular Milky Way? I'm missing something. So in what way is he deconstruction by using the plural form?
No, the plural is not part of the deconstruction. He's pointing to several ways instead. But there are different ways to get. Not only one. And so to speak, misusing the word Milky Way. So that is not part of the construction per se. Let it sink in. And I think we could put a pause or stop.
A stop, I think it's 1 hour and let me see, 39. Should we continue perhaps a few minutes more?
I can continue. when he comes to inaugurate this theme and names it in his very title, it is in order to be frightened or indignant, faced with the death of philosophy. The imminence matters less than the end. The end is near, they seem to say, which does not exclude that it may have already taken place. A little as in John's Apocalypse, the imminence of the end or the last judgment does not exclude a certain "you are dead, stay awake." Whose dictation follows close on the allusion to a second death that will never overtake the victor. Kant is sure that those who speak in this tone expect some benefit from it, and that is what will first interest me. What benefit? What bonus of seduction or intimidation? What social or political advantage? Do they want to cause fear? Do they want to give pleasure? To who? And more importantly, how? Do they want to terrify? To blackmail? To lure into an outmatching in enjoyment? Is this contradictory? in view of what interests, to what ends do they wish to come with these heated proclamations on the end to come, or the end already accomplished? And here he comes into something very important. The apocalypse has already come. I wanted to speak to you today a little about this. In of a certain tone and of what comes arrive to philosophy as its death. Of the relation between this tone, this death, and the apparently calculated benefit of this eschatological mystagogy. The eschatological tells the eschaton, the end, or rather, importantly, the extreme, the limit, the term, the last. What comes in extremis to close a history, genealogy, or very simply a countable series. Mystagoges, that is Kant's word and specific charge. Before coming to my topic, I shall take out some paradigmatic traits in Kant's indictment. Paradigmatic and contra-paradigmatic. For I am perhaps in repeating what he does, going to come round to doing the contrary, or preferably something else. The time to finish this, how much do we have?
1 hour 49.
Okay, I finished this. The mystagoges make a scene. That is what interests Kant. But at what moment do the mystagoges come on stage and at times go into a trance? At what moment do they begin to play the mysterious ones? Here we have of the last tale of this, reading two things. The already arrived apocalypse. It's already here. Otherwise, it would not be an apocalypse. You are dead, stay awake. Whose dictation, I'm quoting here, does not exclude and follows closely on the allusion to a second death. This is alluding also, of course, as you see, the clinging to existence will stop the existence to come about. The clinging or fixating on one contradiction instead of another one will stop the flow. The many different ways, plural. We mentioned earlier left-right chirality. Could be helpful to think in scientific terms where this alludes to. The different paths make for one path, life, and death is only one of two choices. In many parts of the world, still today, death is synonymous with life. Japan, for instance, without death, no life. And be careful here to think I don't mean death as the end point. It means the opening up of the meaning, because life in the end is meaning. The myriads of connections. The second is the mystagogue, the eschatological mystagogue. And how they come to play, or plays, the role of indictment towards creation, the meaning-given questioner of being, I would say. That's my comment. It is truly mysterious as being completely out on the open. Maybe a short last comment?
Let me stand here so the viewers can admire the beautiful church in the background. Let me repeat something. Where did you leave it? So Mr. So page 8. So Kant is about the tone, and in John's Apocalypse, chapter 3, we read the words, "You are dead, stay awake," whose dictation follows close on the allusion to a second death that will never overtake the victor. But Derrida points out that the apocalypse is already here. In every language, apocalypse means destruction. So when you speak apocalypse is here, it means more or less that the destruction, the end is close. But apocalypse means revelation, so apocalypse could be something positive. It's revealing, and perhaps we should take this in an active sense. Apocalypse is something revealing, revelation, and not the passive noun. I was looking for this strange figure. Apocalypse is already arrived. I don't find it here. Who is the figure that Kant mentions? I can't actually find it. Who is this mysterious figure that I don't even know where you read it. This bogus philosopher. I don't find it here. Strange.
Did you have a question?
What is the name of the figure that Kant mentions?
Maybe a more philosophical question. We can look at that later.
I don't find the passage that you read, Tonos. Dorian. No, I don't find the passage. Strange. I don't even. What did you read recently?
We take it later. Put the question.
Okay. No, I don't have a question because I don't find the passage. Okay, thank you.
So the bogus philosopher could also, if I extend beyond Derrida, be the one who connects in an unmannered fashion the words. Semantically is often called, or etymologically, and thereby constricting, making language atonal. And it sort of rids the meaning in language. It becomes less forceful. What Derrida is doing in his destruction or deconstruction is to invigorate once more. Gala is a more true connection to the Hebrew Gala. It is not, as often Heidegger called Historia, it's Geschichte. It needs to be completely new. It needs to be, so to speak, a molestation. Derrida often calls himself a virus. Think about it that way. Something that comes in and in a prepared structure imitates its superficial and then begins to act within it, making the structure work more invigorated, more active. Helpful here is, of course, the voice of the friend. I often refer to that we deafen our ears to the words if we make semantic or etymological connections. We no longer hear, because it needs to be, so to speak, anew, like the apocalypse. We have to round up there and say thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a very pleasant